influential women in history. As I'm recording this, it's very close to Valentine's Day, but we're also closely approaching International Women's Day, and I find myself getting more and more interested in historically important women. I think so much about the invisible labor and those that laid the foundation for so much of our modern lives. I know as well that many women's lives' work have been repackaged or mistakenly, more so purposefully sold to us as someone else's. I'm reminded of the excerpt from Delusions of Gender by Cordelia Fine, PhD, speaking to women's lack of involvement in politics or invention being correlated to not having access to reading or writing, higher education, or voting. It would seem to me like common sense that women's stories in history are kept out by men's efforts in subduing them, but for me, this only solidifies exactly why telling their stories is so crucial. Before we get started, I'm just going to say a few things. Number one is that this is, of course, not a comprehensive list. With nearly all things in history, parts can be lost or destroyed, and when we lose one mind, we lose the entirety of their perspective on these stories. Historians can build their own depictions, but even then, over time, we only have a depiction of a depiction, and you can see how that might get watered down. I will always do my best to research as far as I can and provide the most comprehensive understanding, but it is simply impossible to recreate that which was made over a lifetime. The next thing is that I'm starting with Marie Curie, as I believe her to be the most well known on this list. You can feel free to correct me if there's a name that you need to fangirl over. Your favorite's your favorite, and I understand hyperfixation. However, the rest of them are in no particular order. As I research and come across more names, I continued to add them to my writing, and of course, as always, feel free to add any information that I might have missed in the comments. I am one person interested in learning many broad subjects, so my information is always going to be more limited than that of a small group who hyperfocus on this topic. Lastly, the full list of names in order in the case that you'd like to jump ahead: Marie Curie, Florence Bascom, Marie Tharp, Vera Rubin, Mary Golda Ross, Mary Angel Pennington, Ellen Ochoa, Lise Meitner, Ada Lovelace, Inga Lehman, Mary Jackson, Jane Goodall, Dorothy Vaughan, and Katherine Johnson. Marie Curie. Marie was a Polish-born French physicist and is most famous for her work on radioactivity. She won 2 Nobel Prizes, the first being in 1903 with Henri Becquerel and her husband Pierre Curie for physics. Along with that, she was the sole winner in 1911 for chemistry. Marie Curie was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the only woman to win the award in 2 different fields. In childhood, she was renowned for having an incredible memory. At 16 years old, she received a gold medal for her completion of secondary education at the Russian Lycée. Due to her father losing his savings through poor investments, Marie Sklodowska took work as a teacher and read in Polish to women workers at the Nationalist Free University, TKN 2019. Marie could not enroll in the University of Warsaw. Women were not admitted, so she and her sister, along with several other friends, attended a floating university, or an illegal night school, with classes meeting and changing locations to evade authorities. December 1898, the Curies discover radium-2026. At 18 years old, she stood post as governess. With her earnings, she financed her sister's Bronislawa's medical studies in Paris, under the agreement that Bronislawa would later help Marie get an education. In 1891, Marie moved to Paris and started following the lectures of Paul Appel, Gabriel Lippmann, and Edmond Baudy. At Sorbonne, she also met many physicists who were already well known. Sklodowska worked late into the night and came first in the license of physical sciences in 1893. In 1894, she placed second in the license of mathematical sciences after beginning her work in Lippmann's research lab. Marie married Pierre Curie on July 25, 1895. Their partnership would come to receive world recognition. Their discovery of polonium, named by Marie in honor of her native land, in the summer of 1898, and radium a few months later, led to this. Around this time, Marie was looking for a thesis subject and decided to find out if the phenomenon, which she later called radioactivity, discovered in uranium was also found in other matters. She found that it was the case for thorium at the same time as G.C. Schmidt. Her attention was then drawn to the pitch blende, which had a level of activity which surpassed pure uranium. Pierre joined her in the work she had taken on. This was what led to the discovery of polonium and radium. Though Pierre was focused on the physical study of new radiation, Marie struggled to obtain pure radium. One of Pierre's pupils helped achieve this, and upon the results of this research, Marie Curie received her Doctor of Science in June 1903, to which she and Pierre were awarded the Davy Medal of the Royal Society. Later, they shared, along with Becquerel, the Nobel Prize in Physics for the discovery of radioactivity. In 1906, Pierre Curie passed away, and Marie Curie began to devote all her energy to completing the scientific work that they had undertaken. On May 13, 1906, Marie was appointed to the professor role that became vacant upon her husband's death. She was the first woman to teach at Sorbonne, and in 1911 she was awarded the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for the isolation of pure radium. Through the course of World War I, Marie Curie, with the help of her daughter Irene, focused on the development of the use of X-rays. After this, Marie Curie dedicated her research to the study of the chemistry of radioactive substances and the potential medical applications of those substances. In her later life, she continued to give lectures in Belgium, Brazil, Spain, and Czechoslovakia. She was also a member of the International Commission on Intellectual Cooperation by the League of Nations. She also had the pleasure of seeing the Curie Foundation's creation in Paris and the implementation of the Radium Institute in Warsaw, in which her sister Bronislawa became director. Tikaken 2019. On July 4, 1934, Marie died from aplastic anemia. Prior to this, she had little understanding of the negative health impacts of radium. She had suspected it when a fellow researcher and her personal assistant both died of blood disease. However, she did little to monitor her own blood. In 1932, her wrist broke and it took much longer to heal than was considered normal. She noticed her vision deteriorating and that the radiation burns on her fingers had become increasingly more painful. It was only after her death that we came to learn that once radium is in a person's bone, it is incredibly difficult to extract. Gray, 2018. In 1995, Marie's ashes were enshrined in the Pantheon in Paris. She was the first woman to receive this honor. Her office and lab are preserved as the Curie Museum in the Curie Pavilion of the Radium Institute. Her work paved the way for the discovery of the neutron. Tikaken 2019. Not only that, but her work with radium and its health effects were pivotal in saving the lives of future radium girls. Her research highlighted the danger of repeated exposure to radium and led to regulations and safety standards updates for workers in the radium industry. If you don't know about the radium girls, that's another rabbit hole to go down, but the basics of it are radium was used in so many products because it gave them a gorgeous sheen, and the women that helped create these products were instructed that radium was good or at least fine for their body and health, and told to lick the paintbrushes to keep them shaped into a fine tip. This in turn led to significant and horrifying health complications, and in the end, our understanding of radioactivity from the work of the Curies led to changes in regulations and saved many more girls from similar fates. Wikipedia Contributors 2019b. Florence Bascom. Florence was an educator and geological surveyor. She is the first American woman geologist, and she earned bachelor's and master's degrees at the University of Wisconsin and later received the first PhD awarded to a woman from Johns Hopkins. From 1896 to 1908, she was the associate editor of the American Geologist. She wrote 40 scientific articles on gravel, geomorphology, and genetic petrography. Editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2019. Bascom was born to a father that was a philosophy professor and a mother that was an activist in the suffrage movement. This was a perfect combination in that they both encouraged her to pursue science. She earned several degrees at the University of Wisconsin and then selected geology as a major in her application to Johns Hopkins University. The president of the school, Daniel C. Gilman, opposed the co-education of women. Bascom petitioned for admission with the support of her Wisconsin professors. She had to sit behind a screen so as to not distract male students. Acadia National Park editors no date. This feels so played out and cliche. Honestly, if an attraction to a classmate of any gender stands in your way of education, that should be addressed within yourself. Perhaps you don't want your success enough to lock in. Moving on, she finally had the opportunity to conduct field work, and she became well known for her study of rocks in Piedmont, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. She was the first woman to receive a doctorate from Johns Hopkins in 1893, and Daniel Gilman sent a letter of congratulations stating she had achieved her honors without favoritism. After that, she worked at Ohio State briefly, and she then took a position at Bryn Mawr College, which was a women's college at which she began building a program for geology. Her emphasis was on fieldwork, and this created issues with the president at Bryn Mawr, M. Carey Thomas, between her demands for students to get a physical education credit for the work and Thomas's demands for the women to wear appropriate apparel for outdoors. It often brought her into conflict. In 1894, Florence was the second woman to be elected to the Geological Society of America, and in 1896, she was the first woman to work for the United States Geological Survey. She would conduct fieldwork in the summer and return to Bryn Mawr for the rest of the year for teaching. She did not cook or iron and was restless and independent. She loved the field and, somewhat shockingly, was also a poet. Acadia National Park editors no date. I would argue, though, that it's only shocking if you don't believe many forms of science to be an art and would ignore the creativity that lives in a mind like that. But I digress. Marie Tharp. Marie is most well known for mapping the ocean floor. She was an oceanographer and cartographer and made revolutionary discoveries about the nature of the ocean floor. She not only created the first maps of the floor, but she also definitively showed geological diversity and supported the theory of continental drift. She developed our understanding of how oceans and continents are formed, and she did most of this even though she wasn't allowed on search expeditions because she was a woman. It's such a nice symmetrical ocean, the Atlantic. I felt sorry for the people who had to do the Pacific. It was so much more complicated. That's a quote from Marie Tharp as referenced in Grant 2025. Marie Tharp was born in 1920 to Bertha, who was a teacher, and William, a soil surveyor. Her father worked for the United States Department of Agriculture and took the family around the country. Marie lived in many states and attended multiple, as many as 2 dozen or 24, schools up to and throughout high school. She would often accompany her father on his surveying jobs and develop some of her skills that she would use in later life during that time. In college, she struggled with deciding on her major. Surveying she had done with her father was considered men's work, but traditional women's jobs held little appeal to her. She changed her major multiple times. Before she graduated with a degree in English and music, she had took several courses in geology. This was when her whole worldview shifted. She continued to get a master's degree in petroleum geology from the University of Michigan and then a degree in mathematics from the University of Tulsa. It was in 1948, when she moved to New York with her husband of a few years, that she landed a job with Columbia University's geology department. She assisted a graduate student named Bruce in attempting to map the ocean floor. At the time, people believed that the ocean floor was flat with little features. However, Tharp's gender was made to play a role in stopping her from collecting the data by herself. Bruce would go on expeditions, collect data using sonar, and return it back to Tharp. She was tasked with charting the depth of the ocean floor based on those echoes. She drafted topographic maps by hand and often discussed the frustrating manner of her work. The data pointed to a valley in the middle of the Atlantic and a chain of volcanic activity that pointed to a theory that had been previously dismissed: continental drift. Bruce dismissed Mary's conclusion and made her redo her calculations. He later admitted that he had disregarded her work for girl talk and didn't believe it for an entire year. 1957, Tharp and Bruce published the first map of the Atlantic Ocean's floor, in which there were depictions of canyons, mountains, some taller than Everest, and ridges. It created such a controversy in the oceanography community that Jacques Cousteau was determined to prove her wrong and lowered a camera into the Atlantic. The only issue is, he ended up proving her right. In 1967, National Geographic published Marie and Bruce's map of the Indian Ocean's floor, and in 1968 she was finally allowed to go on a research cruise. In 1977 was when National Geographic published their landmark map of the entire ocean floor. This map had been reproduced any number of times, and the original can be found in the Library of Congress. 1977 was also the year that Bruce Heaton died. The year after, the National Geographic Society gave him and Marie Tharp their highest honor, the Hubbard Medal. One New York Times reporter described the importance of the ocean floor map as not completely accurate, but nonetheless one of the most remarkable accomplishments in modern cartography. Grant 2025. Jane Goodall also received the Hubbard Medal, which was mentioned in the previous source, and I will add her to the end of the list. I already have. Chronologically, though, so she is at the end, and then potential others found go after her. Rubin. Rubin was most known for her work on galaxy rotation rates. She provided compelling evidence to the existence of dark matter, and over the course of her career, she observed over 200 galaxies and mentored many who aspired to be astronomers. Her work made a significant impact on the field of astrophysics. Wikipedia Contributors 2019c. At a young age, Vera's family moved to Washington, D.C., during which time she became obsessed with astronomy after watching the stars through her bedroom window. Her father and mother encouraged her to pursue this study, with her father even helping her build her first telescope. At the time her name was Vera Cooper, she went to Vassar College on scholarship. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa, the oldest honor society in the United States. In 1948, she received her bachelor's degree in astronomy and was the only astronomy major to graduate from Vassar that year. The same year she married Robert Joshua Rubin. Vera Rubin then tried to enroll at Princeton University, but was rejected based on gender. She was accepted into Harvard, but turned it down in favor of Cornell, to be close to her husband. Later, Vera recounted how Harvard Observatory's director, Donald Menzel, had handwritten her about how each time he gets a good woman applied for the program, she goes off and gets married. Jazana 2019. I find this entertaining to the slightest degree, but only because it is very clear marriage did not stop Vera's career or livelihood, which was and is sadly the case for many young women. Vera earned her master's degree from Cornell in 1951. Her research involved the study of 109 galaxies, including the Milky Way, and she theorized that there was a particular pole around which galaxies orbited. She also found a plane that had a much denser pack of galaxies than other regions, which is now known as evidence of the supergalactic plane. Rubin presented her thesis to her advisor, who suggested she present her evidence to the American Astronomical Society, AAS, but that someone else present it for her. He believed that as Vera was pregnant with her first child and not a member of the AAS, it would not go over well. He suggested she present it under his name. She disregarded his advice and presented it to them while 9 months pregnant. The audience was skeptical, and as such, only a brief version of her thesis was published, and after the birth of her first child, she was accepted into the doctoral program at Georgetown University. Years earlier, her would-be advisor, George Gamow, contacted her to hear the nature of her work on galaxy rotation, yet he would not let her sit in on his lectures because wives were not allowed. In 1954, she completed her dissertation. She concluded that galaxies were not randomly distributed and instead formed in clusters. Her work was largely unrecognized until the 70s. 1965 was when her work began at Carnegie Institution's Department of Terrestrial Magnetism. She worked with an astronomer named W. Kent Ford and studied the rotation of the Andromeda Galaxy. They found that it didn't matter the distance from the galaxy's center, objects all moved at the same orbital velocity. Dark matter would cause the orbital speed to remain relatively constant. Before Rubin's work, dark matter was only an unproved theory. Vera Rubin was awarded the National Medal of Science in 1993 and was constantly mentioned as a candidate for the Nobel Prize. Carnegie Institution created a postdoctoral research fund in her honor. Jazana 2019. Unfortunately, in 2016, Vera passed away due to complications with dementia, but her legacy and the strides she paved the way for all those after her live on. Wikipedia Contributors 2019b. Mary Golda Ross. Mary was famous for being the first Native American woman engineer. She was a pioneer in aerospace engineering, and she was a Cherokee mathematician and the first woman and only Indigenous member of the Advanced Development Projects, or Skunk Works, for Lockheed Martin Aircraft Company. Apologies, I said that wrong. It's now Lockheed Martin. Lake 2024. Mary contributed significantly to the P-38 aircraft safety in World War II. She improved missile launches from submarines and she laid the groundwork for Apollo missions. She also outlined a theoretical concept for space travel to Mars and Venus. Mary was also an advocate for young women and Indigenous persons to get an education in STEM. Rosengren 2025. Ross was the daughter of Mary Henrietta Moore Ross and William Wallace Ross Jr. Both of Mary's parents were citizens of the Cherokee Nation, which was otherwise known as the Anigiduwagi, or people from Katua. Wikipedia Contributors 2019a, forgive me if I said either of those wrong. She was also the great great granddaughter of John Ross, and John Ross was the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, and in the 1830s he led legal actions fighting the Indian Removal Act, Lake 2024. For more information on this part of history, you can see my other writing, The Trail of Tears and the Effects It Has on Indigenous People to this day. It's in both the Patreon and the Substack, linked in the description. John Ross's efforts, however, failed, and the United States government under President Andrew Jackson forced the Aniunwia people, Wikipedia Contributors 2019a, out of Georgia and into Oklahoma. This later became known as the Trail of Tears. Mary's parents sent her to live with her grandparents in Topeka, Oklahoma, so that she could attend school. Topeka was the former capital of the Cherokee Nation. Mary had many Indigenous teachers during primary school and high school, including her high school math teacher, who was also Cherokee. She excelled in math and science, and in 1928 she earned a bachelor's degree in mathematics from Northeastern State Teachers College in Topeka. For nearly a decade after she graduated, Mary taught math and science in Oklahoma public schools, and in 1936 she began working as a statistical clerk for the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C. In 1937, she was assigned to work as an advisor to the girls at the Santa Fe Indian School in New Mexico. Mary continued to pursue further education through this time, and she took summer classes for years, which built her interest in astronomy. 1938 was when she graduated with a master's degree in mathematics from Colorado State College of Education. In 1941, just before the United States entered World War II, Ross moved to California. It was difficult for women to find work in industrial labs as mathematicians and scientists, but the war had an increased need for these skills and provided Ross with the opportunity to work outside of education. 1942 was when she was hired by Lockheed. This was where she concentrated on improving the designs, particularly the aerodynamics of the P-38 fighter plane. As men returned from the war, a lot of women had been let go from their positions, but Mary Golda Ross's abilities had convinced Lockheed to keep her on. They even arranged for her to attend UCLA to obtain certification in aeronautical engineering. In 1949, she was registered professional engineer, which made her the first Indigenous woman to be an engineer. While much of what Ross contributed remained a secret, we do know that she had begun creating designs for interplanetary travel. She developed operational guidelines for spacecraft, orbiting satellites, and theorized the potentiality of traveling to Mars and Venus. And as Cold War tensions developed, Mary worked on several missile related projects. She retired from Lockheed in 1973, and we also know that she was committed to improving the educational opportunities for women and all natives, especially in engineering. She believed that Indian culture had a lot of ancient wisdom to help solve modern problems. In 2019, Mary Golda Ross was featured on a commemorative dollar coin. She has largely been considered a hidden figure, as much of her contributions to American aerospace engineering have been historically ignored. Lake 2024. Mary Engel Pennington is renowned for the work she did in the field of food preservation and refrigeration. Pennington developed many of the earliest standards and equipment in ensuring year-round access to foods free from bacterial contamination. She was the first woman to be a lab chief in the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA. She played a critical role in implementing the Pure Food and Drugs Act to improve food safety and quality. Her contributions significantly impacted the health of generations of Americans by ensuring that perishable foods can be kept safe and fresh longer. Jones, 2025. Pennington was born in 1872. She first discovered her love for science from reading Rand's medical chemistry at just 12 years old. She asked the headmistress of the private girls' school she attended to offer a chemistry course. However, her request was denied as the headmistress believed that chemistry was not a field which girls or women should study. When Mary was 18, she enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania. There, she earned a certificate of proficiency in chemistry and biology in 1892. This was awarded instead of a bachelor's during that time, as the university was not allowing women to be awarded degrees. Then, despite the case, Pennington's academic record was so impressive that the university opted to admit her to a graduate program. In 1895, Mary Engel Pennington received her doctorate in chemistry. 1905 was when Pennington joined the United States Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Chemistry, which later became the FDA. In 1906, she applied for the position of Chief of the Food Research Lab. She was, of course, hesitant to apply because she knew how unlikely it was that a woman would be given the position. Despite this, with encouragement from Harvey Wiley, she took the examination, and he concealed her gender under the labeling of M.E. Pennington. She achieved the highest possible score and was offered the job. She was the first woman to ever serve as the FDA lab chief in 1906. Then, in 1906, after the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act, Pennington developed revolutionary standards of safety for processing chicken and milk. She developed methods free from spoiling for shipping poultry, eggs, and other perishables. Her methods were adopted across the food handling industry. 1917, when the United States entered World War I, Pennington was assigned to future President Herbert Hoover's War Food Administration, WFA. This was an agency that was created to maximize food production and minimize waste during the war. She had to test the storage and cooling systems of 40,000 refrigerated rail cars for the nation. She experimented with different types of loading, ice bunkers, and circulation systems. Pennington helped set national standards for construction and insulation in cold storage. She held patents for a poultry cooling rack, a bacteria resistant way of treating eggs, and a sterile food product container. She even oversaw the design and construction of commercial and home refrigerators later in her career. In 1940, she was awarded the Garvin Medal from the American Chemical Society. Then, in 1959, she became the first woman to be inducted into the American Poultry Historical Society Hall of Fame. She spent more than 40 years improving the understanding of food safety. National Inventors Hall of Fame. Editors, no date. Ellen Ochoa. Ochoa is most widely known for being the first Hispanic woman to travel in space in 1993. She also made history as the first Latina director of NASA's Johnson Space Center in 2013. This made her the first Hispanic director and only the second woman director of the center. She is also largely recognized for her contributions to space exploration and STEM education. She continues to inspire many to pursue careers in science and technology. The Historian, 2024. Ellen was born on May 10, 1958, in Los Angeles. She is an American administrator and former astronaut. She studied electrical engineering at Stanford University, which earned her a master's degree in 1981 and a doctorate in 1985. She was a specialist in the development of optical systems, the editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2019b. For reference, optical systems are, quote, an assembly of components designed to manipulate light for various applications, including imaging, sensing, and telecommunications. Shanghai Optics Editors 2023. Ochoa worked as a research engineer at Sandia National Laboratories and at the Ames Research Center of NASA. She helped create several systems and methods that received patents, including optical systems for recognizing an imperfection in a repeating pattern. Ellen was selected by NASA in 1990 to participate in the astronaut program. She became the first Hispanic woman astronaut in 1991. In 1993, she served as mission specialist aboard the STS-56 mission of the Space Shuttle Discovery. This made her the first Latina in space. She and others aboard the mission did various experiments that studied the sun and how it interacted with Earth's atmosphere. They also released Spartan, which studied solar wind for 2 days before collection. She was then a part of the STS-66 Atlantis mission in 1994. This mission involved some of the same experiments Ochoa had done on the previous flight, though with this mission they released Christus Spaz, which studied the Earth's atmosphere for 8 days before being collected. In 1999, she was a member of the STS Discovery that executed the first docking to the International Space Station. At that point, it only had two modules, the Russian Zarya and the American Unity. They carried supplies to the ISS to get it ready for astronauts to stay there. They also brought 2 cranes which would be used in building the rest of the station. Finally, in 2002, Ellen Ochoa returned to the ISS on the STS-110 Atlantis mission, on which she used a robotic arm along with Daniel Burch to form the ISS frame. Overall, she spent more than 40 days in space. 2007 was when Ellen became the deputy director of the Johnson Space Center in Houston. 6 years later, she was promoted to director, and this was when she was the first Hispanic person and only the second woman to hold this position. During her time in this position, she oversaw work on the Orion. This endeavor was meant to travel farther than any spacecraft with a crew had and for exploration of Mars. She retired from the Johnson Space Center in 2018 to become vice chair of the National Science Board, which runs the National Science Foundation. She served as the NSB chair in 2020 to 2022, and in 2024, Ellen Ochoa received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2019b. She continues to be a passionate advocate for STEM education, especially among underrepresented minorities and young girls. She's a constant source of inspiration for many individuals worldwide looking to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. Ellen Ochoa is a testament to what dedication, passion, and perseverance can do not only for yourself, but for the people watching. Lise Meitner. Many people today consider Lise Meitner to be the most significant woman scientist of the 20th century. She's most known for her work in nuclear physics, most notably her role in the discovery of nuclear fission. Alongside her nephew, Otto Frisch, she illuminated the characteristics of nuclear fission, which is a process that powers nuclear reactors and atomic bombs. She was an Austrian-born physicist and shared the Enrico Fermi Award in 1966 with chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann for their joint research which led to the discovery of uranium fission. Lise Meitner received her doctorate at the University of Vienna in 1906. Following that, she attended lectures by Max Planck in Berlin in 1907, at which point she joined Hahn in his research on radioactivity. During the 3 decades in which they worked together, they were some of the first to isolate isotope protactinium-231, studied nuclear isomerism, beta decay, and in the 1930s investigated the effects of neutron bombardment of uranium. Forgive me if I said any of those words wrong. As she was Jewish, she did have to leave Nazi Germany in the summer of 1938, at which point she settled in Sweden. After that, Hahn and Strassmann demonstrated that barium appears upon a neutron-bombarded uranium, at which point Meitner and her nephew, Otto, had found the physical characteristics of this division. In 1939, they proposed the term is fission for this process. In 1944, Hahn received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for discovering nuclear fission. Many have argued that Meitner deserved some share of that award. During that time, Lise was invited to work on the Manhattan Project. However, Meitner opposed the atomic bomb and rejected the offer. In 1960, she retired in England, and she died 8 years later, upon which her tombstone read, "A physicist who never lost her humanity." The chemical element meitnerium was later named in her honor. The editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2019c. This seems to be the one that tugged my heart the most. Not only did she have to run away from her country of origin due to hate, had much of her career attributed to the men around her, but she kept her humanity through it all. She despised the atomic bomb, yet many would think her crazy for not jumping on an opportunity of fame and fortune at the cost of quote unquote some lives. We hardly need more dramatic ways to kill each other when humans have been doing that from the beginning of time. I only wish people could see her story and be reminded of how we all survived due to altruism. Ada Lovelace. Ada is known as the first computer programmer. She is renowned for her work on Charles Babbage's analytical engine and her insights in computing. Her contribution has held a lasting impact on the fields of mathematics and computer science. She is celebrated annually on a day which honors the achievements of women in STEM. Her life and work have continued to inspire generations of scientists and engineers. She is considered a crucial figure in the history of computing. Born December 10, 1815, Ada Lovelace was an English mathematician and an associate of Charles Babbage, his prototype of a digital computer for which she created a program. Lovelace was the only legitimate child of the poet Lord Byron. Her parents legally separated 2 months after she was born, and her father then left Britain forever. Ada never knew him. She had an education through private tutors and then was self-educated, and she was guided in her studies by mathematician and logician Augustus de Morgan, who was the first professor of mathematics at the University of London. On July 8th, she married William King, 8th Baron King, and when he became an earl in 1838, she became Countess of Lovelace. Ada became interested in Babbage's machines as early as 1833 when she met him through their mutual friend and author, Mary Somerville. Somerville was most well noted for her translation and annotation of an article written by the Italian mathematician and engineer Luigi Federico Manabria, Notations sur la machine analytique de Charles Babbage, 1842, which she translated in 1843 to Elements of Charles Babbage's Analytical Machine. Her annotations were detailed and elaborate. Particularly notable was her description of how the analytical engine could be programmed to compute Bernoulli numbers. Babbage only built a portion of the analytical engine, but Ada Lovelace's efforts have been remembered. An early programming language was named Ada after her, Freiberger and Swain 2019. Compared to the other stories, Ada's life seems so much more glamorous and fantastic. I don't imagine life being perfect because I recognize that the less details that we have, the more we're able to fill in with our minds, but I suppose that's why people give unnecessary details when they lie, because they hope it'll stop you from running into conclusions that they might dislike. But I'll also add that I just think she has a beautiful name. Lehmann. Lehmann was a Danish seismologist and geophysicist most known for her contributions to our understanding of Earth's structure. Particularly notable was her discovery in 1936 of the solid inner cores of the Earth. This was groundbreaking information about the planet's composition. She also discovered Lehmann discontinuity, a boundary where seismic wave speeds are different between the inner and outer core, which was of course named after her. Her work earned her international fame regardless of the challenges she faced in her career due to gender discrimination in education. She is remembered as a founder in the field of seismology and geophysics. Wikipedia Contributors 2020. Inga was born to Alfred, a psychology professor, and Edith Horsleff. She grew up in Copenhagen and attended a high school that treated boys and girls equally. This was, of course, considered a progressive idea at the time, but in 1907 she had begun her study of math at the University of Copenhagen and intended to obtain a candidata magistri, comparable to a master's degree. Between 1910 to 1911, Lehman attended Newnham College in Cambridge, but she fatigued from overworking, which led her to return to Copenhagen. She did not attend school between 1911 and 1918 and instead worked as an actuarial assistant. In 1918, she returned to the University of Copenhagen and then graduated with a Kind Mag in mathematics in 1920. She then continued studying mathematics at the University of Hamburg in 1922. Then in 1923, she took another position as an actuarial assistant, this time working with a professor in the science department of the University of Copenhagen. 1925 was when she became an assistant to the Royal Danish Geodetic Institute. Her work involved setting up the first seismic stations in Denmark near Copenhagen, as well as stations in Invigtut and Scoresbjørn, now Itokormit, in Greenland. Her interest in seismology began to grow, and she enrolled at the University of Copenhagen and studied seismology in the summer of 1927. She then graduated with a Magister Scientiarum, or a Master's of Science, in 1928. Within that same year, she was appointed state geodist, and I might have said that word wrong, and made head of the seismological department of the Royal Danish Geodetic Institute. She held that position until she retired in 1953. And the main chunk of her work with the seismological department involved managing the stations that they had set up in Denmark and Greenland. Along with that, she had to collect seismograph information and create bulletins. She had become interested in determining the location of earthquake epicenters more accurately from the data her seismographs offered. She did this by correlating the seismic waveforms. She was also interested in the travel times of varying types of seismic waves through the planet. After a large earthquake in 1929 in New Zealand, Lehman examined seismograph data and noticed that the stations in Russian cities collected seismic waves with a much higher amplitude than what she had expected. She discovered that waves traveling away from the earthquake's focus were bent. 1936 was when Lehman published her findings in a paper that explained that the Earth's layers were made of three shells: mantle, outer, and inner core, and that seismic waves traveled at different speeds but constant velocities. It wasn't until 1970 that the undeniable evidence of the inner core's existence was found through advances in seismographs that the boundaries between the inner and outer core, roughly at a depth of 5,100 kilometers or 3,200 miles, is known as a Lehman discontinuity. She also researched the Earth's mantle and with American seismologist Bino Gutenberg. I also probably said that name wrong. In 1954, Inga noticed there was a region in the Earth's upper mantle where seismic waves travel faster. That region is 50 kilometers or 31 miles deep and is known as the Lehman discontinuity. In 1971, Inga Lehman was awarded the William Bowie Medal of the American Geophysical Union due to her contributions in the field of geophysics. She also received the Medal of Seismological Society of America in 1977, and in 1995, the Inga Lehman Medal of the American Geophysical Union was created in her honor. Starting in 1997, it was awarded to researchers who made outstanding contributions to the understanding of the structure, makeup, and dynamics of Earth's mantle and core. Rafferty 2019. Our understanding of the planet we live on is largely thanks to Inga Lehman, and I think that's pretty darn cool. I find it lucky and intriguing how perfectly her story lined up with living in Copenhagen and likely having less difficulty in pursuing an education than some others on this list due to that. Mary Jackson was the first African American woman engineer at NASA in 1958. She was a pioneer in mathematics and aerospace engineering. She worked on airflow around aircraft, aerodynamics, and fought racial and gender discrimination in her field. Mary was a leader in helping ensure equal opportunities for future generations, and she and her husband helped many young Langley recruits gain their footing in a new town and new career. For Mary W. Jackson, science and service went hand in hand. In January 2017, Hidden Figures released to theaters, and Janelle Monáe represented Mary Jackson. Shutterly, 2023b. Mary was born and raised in Hampton, Virginia. She graduated high school with the highest honors, and in 1942 she earned a dual degree in mathematics and physical science at the Hampton Institute. She worked as a math teacher in Maryland for a year before returning to Hampton. Later, she married Levi Jackson. In 1951, she began working with the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, at which she was a member of the West Area Computing Unit comprised of African American women mathematicians, and Jackson's supervisor was Dorothy Vaughan. These two women provided data that was later essential to the success of the U.S. space program. During this time, NACA was segregated, and black employees had to use separate bathrooms in dining halls. 1953 was when Mary left the West Computers to work for engineer Kazimierz Sarnecki and conducted experiments in a high-speed wind tunnel. She had to obtain special permission to take classes with white students. She completed the necessary courses, and in 1958 she became the first black woman engineer at NASA. Mary Johnson worked as an aerospace engineer for 20 years. A vast majority of her work focused on the airflow around aircraft. Despite her earlier promotions, she was denied management positions, and in 1979 she left engineering and took a demotion to become the manager of the women's program at NASA. It was in this position that she worked to improve opportunities for all women in the organization. She retired in 1985, and in 2005 she passed away. Mary Jackson's contributions to the space program received much greater notice after her death. She and other West computers Vaughn and Katherine Johnson were the inspiration for Hidden Figures, the American Dream, and the untold story of the black women mathematicians who helped win the space race, which was made into a widely revered film, both of which released in 2016, Britannica Editors 2019, with the film hitting major box offices in 2017. Jane Goodall. Goodall is most known for her research on chimpanzees, which completely altered our understanding of their behavior and social structures. She is also recognized for her lifelong advocacy of conservation and animal welfare. Wikipedia Contributors 2018. Jane Goodall was interested in animal behavior from early on in her life. She left school at 18 and worked as a secretary and a film production assistant until she was able to go to Africa. When she got there, she began assisting paleontologist and anthropologist Louis Leakley, or Louis, however you say that. Working with him eventually led to the establishment of a camp in the Gombe Stream Game Reserve for her to monitor the behavior of chimpanzees in the region. In 1964, she married Dutch photographer Baron Hugo van Leeuwenhoek, who was sent to Tanzania in 1962 to film her work. Together, they had a son in 1967 and later divorced. The University of Cambridge awarded Jane a PhD in ethology in 1965. She was one of the very few candidates who received a PhD without first having a bachelor's degree. After her divorce with Lawick, she married Derek Bryson, who was a member of Tanzania's parliament and director of the Tanzanian National Park System. He helped establish the Gombe Stream National Park before he passed away from cancer in 1980. Except for a few short periods of absence, Jane remained in Gombe until 1975. She often directed the fieldwork of other doctoral candidates, and in 1977 she was a co-founder of the Jane Goodall Institute for Wildlife Research, Education, and Conservation, typically called the Jane Goodall Institute. She also created many other initiatives, including a youth service program, and over the course of her career, she was able to set right many misunderstandings about chimpanzees. Notable corrections being that these animals are omnivores, not herbivores, and that they can make and use several tools, and that they have highly developed social behaviors. Goodall wrote several books and articles about many aspects of her life's work. She continued to write and lecture on environmental and conservation issues in the 21st century. She became a UN Messenger of Peace in 2002, and she received many honors, including being created Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 2003, the Templeton Prize in 2021, the Stephen Hawking Medal for Science Communication in 2022, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2025. A documentary about her life, Jane, was released in 2017, Britannica 2018A. Sadly, she passed in October of 2025, Jacobo 2025. Dorothy Vaughan. Dorothy was a star mathematician and computer programmer. She was known for her pivotal contributions to the U.S. space program. She was the first African American manager at NACA, which later became NASA. She played an important role in the development of computer programming and was indispensable to the success of several space missions, particularly those during the space race. She helped break many of the barriers for women and African Americans in STEM. Shutterly 2023A. Dorothy was born in Kansas City, Missouri. Later, she received a degree in mathematics from Wilberforce University near Ohio. She worked as a math teacher in Virginia and married Howard S. Vaughan. In December of 1943, she started working in NACA's West Area Computing Unit, a group of African American women who were considered human computers. These women provided data that was vital to the success of the U.S. space program. At this time, NACA was segregated. Despite these factors, Vaughan was promoted to team lead of the West Computers in 1949. She was NACA's first black supervisor and one of the very few women supervisors. She was head of the West Computers until 1958, when NACA merged with the newly created NASA and closed the segregated facilities. Vaughan and others then joined the Analysis and Computation Division. At that point, the space program had begun to use electronic computers, and Vaughan became an expert at Fortran, which was a computer programming language used for scientific and algebraic applications. Dorothy Vaughan retired from NASA in 1971, and 2016 to 2017, after the release of Hidden Figures, attention to the contributions she made, the editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2019A, grew significantly. In the movie, Octavia Spencer represented Dorothy Vaughan, Shetterly 2023A. Katherine Johnson. Katherine was most known for her calculations of orbital mechanics. Her calculations were necessary to the success of the first crewed spaceflights. She calculated flight paths, including those for the Apollo missions. She helped send astronauts to the moon. She was also an inspiration and path paver for African Americans and women in STEM. She was one of the first black students to join West Virginia's graduate schools, National Geographic and Sorreo 2024. Born Catherine Coleman on August 26, 1918, her intelligence and skill with numbers was readily apparent. By the time she was 10, she had started attending high school. At age 18, Coleman graduated with the highest honors from West Virginia State College. She earned bachelor's degrees in mathematics and French, and she then moved to Virginia to take a teaching job. Britannica 2018b. For clarification, a little bit earlier than this, um, most women were not allowed to study math. During the 1950s and earlier, women typically had limited opportunities after receiving an education in mathematics. The societal norms often restricted women to teaching jobs with the degrees that they received. Despite this, many women have made significant contributions, yet many of their achievements were overlooked. Smithsonian Editors 2016. So if you go back through this reading, or even if you don't, try to think back on how many of these women's careers started with teaching or assistant jobs. Now think of how many of them still found or find ways to be successful. The next time you think you can't do something or be someone, remember that nobody can hold you from what you're meant to become. In 1939, Catherine was selected to be one of the first 3 African American students to enroll in a graduate program at West Virginia University. There she studied math, but she left shortly after marrying James Goebel and decided to start a family. Goebel died in 1956, and 3 years later she married James Johnson. In 1953, she began working at NACA's West Area Computing Unit. For reference, this is 2 years after Mary Jackson began working there and 10 years after Dorothy Vaughan started working there. It was still segregated when she started on, until NACA became NASA and banned segregation in 1958. At NASA, Catherine was a Space Task Group member. She co authored a paper with one of the group's engineers about the calculations for getting a spacecraft into orbit in 1960. This was the first time a woman author in her division had received credit for a research report. She authored or co authored 26 research reports throughout her career. Catherine also played a significant role in NASA's Mercury program from 1961 to 1963. She also calculated the Path for Freedom 7 in 1961. That was the spacecraft that put the first U.S. astronaut in space. Also, in 1961, John Glenn requested that Johnson verify that the electronic computer had planned his flight correctly. Glenn was then the first U.S. astronaut to orbit Earth. He was aboard the Friendship 7. Furthermore, Katherine Johnson was part of a team that calculated where and when to launch the Apollo 7 mission in 1969. She helped send 3 men to the moon. She later worked on the Space Shuttle program. In 1986, she retired from NASA, 15 years after Dorothy Vaughan and 1 year after Mary Jackson, Britannica 2018b. Combined, the three dedicated around 90 years of their life to working with NACA and NASA and improving space travel. She received many awards for her work, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015. NASA named the Katherine G. Johnson Computational Research Facility after her in 2016, and that same year, Hidden Figures was released, which moved her story to more widespread popularity. Britannica 2018b. In the movie, Taraji P. Henson represented Katherine Johnson. Shetterly 2016. Ending notes. History has always been built on the backs of women and minorities because necessity breeds invention. When we have continually fought to be seen as equal, as entirely human, it taught us to be incredible, to always perform. It's a bittersweet conversation to be had. A lot of historical women's influences have been covered up, and a lot of history we will never know. But if it's anything like what we've already seen, I know that there's countless women's labor going unnoticed. Either way, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time to learn, and as always, my resources will be in both the Substack and Patreon links below. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.